We will intend, off the back of direction today, also to invite our iwi partners to the council meeting on the 26th of June. So there's a level of understanding and oversight on the direction to move forward. We have received one question in advance from Councillor Tamihana, and I will cover that off during the course of the briefing. Appear to be missing a slide there. That's okay. Not sure what's gone in there. So project objectives, really clear process in terms of providing resilience for our community, but ultimately starting with the principles to mana o te wai, that the awa comes first, followed by the people, and then wider usage of water beyond that. So a lot of the work that shaped the early stages of the project was very much aligned with how do we provide for growth and resilience of our water supply in the longer term, whilst not just simply drawing more water from the reservoir, so from the awa. So if there was any kind of questions around project objectives, quite keen to keep skipping through the slides, but feel free to jump in throughout. I'm not going to sit here and read them. I'm making an assumption everyone's had a good look and come with some questions and clarifications. Councillor Tukua.
I did have one, and no doubt with all the dams being built around the country, this is potentially covered off well. And this is maybe it's just a thought that when there's flooding and it moves quite rapidly, well, essentially in a dam you're capturing some and holding for future use, but without a dam the water runs, right? And in some places it floods, and there's effectively a spread of nutrient, and which can, or pollution, it depends on the condition of the water, but in the case where it provides for the health of surrounding lands or the areas in which it floods for production, assuming that there is some growth in those areas rather than just, it depends on land use, I guess. But is that when you hold more of it and it's not all coming down and spreading and doing that, are there impacts down to the land downriver where it's not going to have that natural flooding occurring? I don't know if I'm making sense, but
yeah, and unfortunately the stock banks that are built preclude that general geomorphologic process of rivers shifting over time and spreading across. So generally it's confined within the river channel. It might be worth us providing a little bit more detail around the types of numbers and the principles. Did you want to talk, Olvi, to a little bit of the hydraulic analysis that we've done in terms of the concept of taking water above minimum flows and how that would sort of work in the wider function of the river?
Yeah. Hi, Ulvi here. It's kind of hard to talk to people without seeing them, but I'll try. As you can hear me all right, right? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So as Dan mentioned, my role in this project, I'm a project manager from day one, from day one from feasibility. So what we're doing here is currently we have a consent to take 15,000 cubic meters of water at intake by the water treatment plant, existing water treatment plant, and our demand is around up to 13,000 a day. So that gives us very little, very little kind of a buffer, 2,000 cubic meters that we have in event of, and on top of that, we have very little storage downstream from water treatment plant, which means that in event of drought or shake or fire or burst pipe, we're going to run out of water very quickly. So The current consent also allows us to take 13,500 cubic meters from at low flow scenario. When the river at minimal flow level, we still can take water up to 13,500 cubic meters a day because we have to run the city, and that's a consent condition, existing consent condition. With the reservoir, I'm calling it less dam, I'm calling it more a reservoir. What we are proposing is to have another intake from the river upstream by the reservoir, and which will be pumped into the reservoir and water stored, raw water stored up to 700 million liters of storage, which will provide more than 30-40 days of storage for the whole city of Leuven, with the growth scenarios that we assumed gonna eventuate. So by doing that, by having that storage, that allows us to look at, to give effect to the first objective of this project, which is health of the hour, which means that when we apply for the consent, we will be suggesting that in a minimum flow scenario, we will not be taking any water from the river unless emergency situation, and there are scenarios that defines those emergency situations. So, which helps the river to kind of to bounce back and be healthy, because right now we have to take water at minimum flow levels, which is not good for the river. So that storage also, it's going to be obviously topped up and rotated, and water will be used using some smart systems by operational people, and that water will be the water to the reservoir will be topped up from the intake in a scenarios of where the water is 10% higher than medium flow level. We don't anticipate we'll be in a position to take water at flood scenarios. It will be more taking water when water is at medium flow levels and above. We will be taking 10% of supplementary allocation that we refer to fill the reservoir. That water, that we done hydrological assessment, and there is at medium flow, it's confirmed that we have enough water in the river to fill the reservoir effectively and operate it. Does it make sense? Do you have any questions so far?
Yeah, that's helpful, obviously. So in some ways, an answer to the question, in that really big peak flood, we wouldn't be taking water because it would have all of that turbidity.
Debris and turbidity, right.
Yeah, the project at a principal level allows us to not just take the amount we need and use it every day, because we've got that buffered storage. It allows us to be a bit smarter about actually taking from the hour when it's above minimum flow.
Exactly right.
And particularly when it's at those, after a period of rain like we've just had over the next 2 or 3 days, you'll see quite a peak in the river, and that's when we can actually get in there, remove that water. It's not having an environmental effect, and rather than kind of just taking what we need on a daily level. So
exactly. Yeah. So this project, Daniel, will definitely support the health of our for that minimum flow level, but at the same time provide that very needed storage for the city of Leuven, because in 5T it's quite tight right now, the storage and supply versus the demand. It's quite on a fence here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so at a high level, it's the hour. We've got to prove those facts with science in terms of when we apply for the consent. The obvious benefits of resilience, so having that storage and ability, but also providing for growth and not just simply taking from the hour. So all of those three key principles has been what we've set out at the start of the project, and it's great that we're not sitting here today to say, yes, we can prove resilience, we provide for growth, but it's going to have a detrimental impact on the hour. It's actually quite the opposite, that this project enables us to not only look at mitigation and improvement, but effectively when we take an opportunity to give back. So it certainly does sit there as part of the one of the key underlying principles of the project.
So yeah, so Dan, just to bring to the table a brief conversation we had before this presentation, and again, this is at that higher level around growth and in particular potentially housing opportunities. So during the last term of council, one of the elected members presented a concept plan where he wondered if there were opportunities to in fact have some lifestyle housing type developments adjacent to or somewhere nearby this complex. Has consideration or could consideration be given to that also, do you think?
We've certainly looked at the previously raised prospect of recreational use, be it housing, boating, swimming. From a drinking water safety perspective, it's certainly not good practice to to have that type of use within a drinking water facility, and certainly from a cultural perspective, it's not really an acceptable approach to take. So quite early in the process, we have really focused on a core project to deliver a water storage reservoir. The footprint of the proposed reservoir effectively takes up 95% of that site on the upper terrace above the existing posed road. The lower terrace, the intention is to almost remove the cows and get the plants and allow that habitat to re-establish. No necessary opportunity for housing in that area, but there is a land certainly to the south that is being currently developed, and also there's a land holding which is currently rural to the eastern side that the landowner may look at future use, but there's it's not within current scope of this project to look at a lake recreational housing type development. It's very much focused on a water reservoir.
Good, Dan, thank you. And most probably realise that I've been involved in this discussion for some time. Look, I appreciate the presentation. I do have, the questions I asked you were around consented bores, river flows, history of the river. And the reason I asked for that data is because I'm really not comfortable that we would commit to such a huge development when it relies on drawing water from the river. I'm really concerned that the health and the status of the awa is not seen to be prioritised, I think, culturally as high as Māori would see the awa. And we're certainly not seeing the resilience of the awa, especially in the last 3 years where we've seen lower levels than ever experienced across the district, not just in the Ohaoa. The reason why the bore information for me is really important is because if there are existing bores already within the location of the reservoir, I would have considered that we would have sought a way of utilising those bores so that we don't have to always rely on drawing from the river. And so I'm going to leave it there, but that for me is a critical point. We need to know who are the users on the awa. We need to know what are the what are the levels that are currently already being taken. We know that the council allocation, I think, is done, from what I've heard, and I'm not sure if Horizons have provided us the information we seek to understand what is the level of allocation still left, not only to the awa but the surrounding tributaries that are connected to the awa and feed the awa. So that's why I raise it. I just don't understand why we need that reservoir, but we don't need to rely on the awa to do it. In my mind, there must be other ways that reservoir can be topped up and maintained that don't rely 100% on the river. So I'll just leave that there.
Daniel, it's Ulvi here. My apologies. I was kicked out of a meeting. I'm back again. My apologies.
Thanks, Olvi. Councillor Tamihana, what I'm hearing is there's a need for more information around the existing bores right along the extent of the Ōhea River in terms of primarily farming and agricultural use. That is really a key point that's been raised throughout the iwi engagement process, that we need to better understand how water is allocated within that catchment, what impact that has on surrounding bores. The situation we find ourselves in is that there's a moratorium on further groundwater supply within the Lake Horowhenua catchment that was put in place some years ago by Horizons, really to put a stop to any further takes due to the likely impacts on Lake Horowhenua from those groundwater flows, which are quite significantly spring fed. I expect that it might be helpful for us to include some of that further context within that council report or appended to it. You may be across some of the conversations we're also having with Wakate and iwi partners around the prospect of the O2L water take, and it's certainly been front of mind to go and understand the impact that additional water take for that O2L project would have on the hour effectively. So all of that data would have to be brought together. Officers have indicated principal level support to say, yes, in theory, if we could repurpose the existing council take and it wasn't required for town, wouldn't impact on the hour, and that was proven, and that iwi partners signed off on it, that it would be feasible to supply the project. So it is certainly, as that O2L project starts to gain momentum, in their best interest for the technical people to get in and resolve some of that on behalf of our collective.
I'm sorry, Paul, but just secondary to that was the point that Olvi raised about no potential storage below our current treatment plant. Again, I reiterate, O2 now are putting a series of storage ponds in for construction. There's some conversations that need to occur about what the lifespan of such storage facilities look like during and potentially after the project, and I think those conversations should be happening now to understand the lifespan of those types of facilities, and location could be key. I know that there's consenting around those locations, but if they don't fit in with a long-term plan potentially to support this district, then maybe we haven't realised that opportunity. So I'll just put it like that.
I entirely agree. When we built a 2,000 square metre pond at northeast Levin to hold water or to hold back stormwater for construction of a project, ultimately it would be great if that aligned with the requirement for council to build a pond in a similar area to store stormwater in the future. So just, I suppose, understand that those are of potentially different scale, that some of those ponds may be 2, 5, 10,000 cubic metres. The reservoir at this particular site, which would be storing fresh water suitable for drinking supply, is in the region of 740,000. So it's quite a large facility. We've been open and honest with Wakatei in our early discussions that we'd really like to explore, if this project was consented, the opportunity for an earthworks, the bulk earthworks to be explored as part of the O2L project. If there was surplus gravel from that, we could be having a conversation with our iwi partners to say, if this gravel was gifted from the awa to the O2L project, that what could potentially come back to fast track some of those improvements across the awa. So there's opportunities there, but ultimately we can't do a lot without a consent process and that iwi support.
And I just wanted to make it clear too that when I talked about lower storage facilities, I wasn't talking just for fellow councillors. It wasn't about drinking water. That was actually relating back to an earlier conversation around firefighting and drought, and an ability to have these types of storage facilities available that aren't in a tank form, but could still form part of a firefighting service or a civil emergency response, is what I was thinking in my mind. Kia ora.
The slide on screen here talks around the level of engagement that we have undertaken with iwi partners over the last 3 years that have taken separate paths to date, that we've engaged with Mupoko, Ngāti Te Kōrehi and Ngāti Raukawa Hapu through Te Tūmata Kāhuki. The Mupoko focus has really been around understanding the technical drivers, the benefits of the project in terms of protecting the awa, and then really turning our focus to cultural offsets and mitigation. So in terms of if this project was to be delivered, what could be provided back to the awa, particularly around establishment of further habitat and improvements in the catchment, and both down and upstream. We have somewhat through the original Gladstone Road project, but subsequent discussions around the Podes Road Reservoir, been engaging with Ngāti Te Kōrehi. They have had a hui earlier in the year in relation to the project, and that was following a joint site visit that we had in late 2023, and given sort of general support in an email in April 2024. Ngāti Raukawa Hapu we've done a lot of work alongside the Catalyst group, understanding the technical, so really getting technical people to speak to technical people around understanding all the river hydraulics, what the consenting process would look like. We have not got official feedback from Hapu as of today, but there's certainly in the submissions to the long-term plan, it was expressed that Hapu have got in behind a number of projects, including this Podes Road project, the POT, and really council haven't stood up to their side of some of those historic agreements. So it's really the message in that process was, yes, we'll support you, but we need to be aligned and we need to do what we say we will in terms of delivering on some of those outcomes. So there's some further work and advancements that we're doing, be it around the POT or around Matakarapa Island or the Shannon wastewater, that ideally we can start to leverage off some good project process in that space. Ultimately, what we've done to date, we could term it early engagement. The phase that will move forward post-decision of council on the 26th of June would be pre-engagement. So it's an 8-week phase where we signal to iwi partners that we are looking to lodge a consent. That would then continue with engagement and a process throughout that consent. We won't put a spoiler on some of what will be direction, but at this point it looks like a standard consent process would be the recommended approach rather than a fast track, but we'll speak to that a little bit more shortly. What we will be doing through that pre-lodgement phase is inviting iwi partners to look at a model around inputting into design, construction, operational phases of the project. So it may take the form of a kaitiaki steering group that sits across the awa. Ultimately, it would be great to have a collective that was focused maunga to mana around the river, but with a key focus within the scope of this project, connecting with the work that's happening on Otuanawa, for example, but also taking ownership of decisions around the management of the water supply in terms of when we would draw down the reservoir versus when we would make decisions around taking water from the awa, and there would be a group that we could actually have open communication and some joint decision making around how that might happen. So that's all part of a process that would need to be developed and ultimately land with some consent conditions. But those have been part of some of those early conversations and aspirations to where we would like to get to in the future. In terms of the reservoir site, 740,000 cubic metres, missing a zero off there for some reason, approximately 10 metres deep. There's been quite a thought process going to this from our technical specialists in terms of how you manage algae within reservoirs and the optimal conditions based on the site. So it's not to say there's not further design work to be done. We've effectively got to a point of what's called consent level design to say, yes, it's feasible. Yes, we've thought about if there's an earthquake. Yes, we've thought about how the reservoir would be drained. But we haven't gone right through that detailed design phase that would come after a consent was granted. So anything further you wanted to add there, Olvi, in terms of outline for the reservoir site?
Not really. I think, Daniel, you covered it well. If there are any questions, happy to respond.
No.
Just a quick question from me, guys. I suppose I'm just looking at the plan, and I suppose the one question I sort of want to ask is how much treatment is required of the water at that space, in terms of, I know it's before it gets to a treatment plant, and I'm just thinking about the ongoing maintenance of such a facility, how much is required to, and I don't really need the answer now. I suppose it's just stuff that I'm thinking about in terms of what is the expectation to maintain a plant as such as this, and are we not doing doubling up by doing something there that's done in a treatment plant? So
I'd have to refer Barry to that in a future briefing where we could possibly talk about how the need for this project to be aligned with our water treatment plant master plan upgrades, that we've got a large sand filter system followed by some pressure filters, followed by some UV. Even with the current extraction, there may be opportunities in the future to look at trials around bypassing of that sand filter, and if the water coming in is sufficient quality, connecting up with the likes of the Timarua processes around their plant optimisation. So when we start to look at a 30-year development plan of our water treatment plant, the consenting of this project would be critical to actually making assumptions around that the treatment process, because we wouldn't be in a position today to say, let's plan for the reservoir without having a consent for it. So, yeah, we acknowledge that there's a lot of work to do in detailed design. The water metering project has provided some great wins in Shannon. That, as of today, with some of the early numbers, we're sitting probably at the lowest we've been in about 4 years in Shannon for water. Only months after installing the first meters, around about 50% below where we were 6 months ago. So we are assuming that even with the 10.3% growth we've experienced in the last 5 years as a district, which is leading the region, that water metering project will provide us enough buffering to consent and plan for the longer term works. I think we've probably covered that slide off from Olvie's explanation earlier in terms of the functionality. Briefly touched around the O2L, which is effectively Wakatane need water for their project, and they've identified that without being able to take from the Ohau River, which is currently fully allocated, they would be forced to extract water from further down in some of the smaller streams, or potentially truck that from the Manawatu River. So there's financial impacts on the O2L project, but there's also a level of potential environmental risk in other catchments if we are to start to put pressure on some of those smaller catchments that don't have that capacity. So the theory, which has been around for some time, is that council are looking to install these water meters over the next 12 months. We will get, potentially a buffering where we talked earlier about the sort of range of 10 to 13,000 cubic meters a day, that we ideally would have enough to supply the O2L project with that residual water that the town doesn't need. There'd be really clear guidelines put in place with evidence around the flow in the awa where we simply turn off the tap for Wakakotahi. So there'd be an opportunity that they, could fill some smaller reservoirs, but if we got a long dry spell, the awa health and then water for the people would be a key, the number one priority. So, there's some conceptual work. The onus is actually on Wakate to do the technical investigation, and we've said when that comes back to satisfy council officers and iwi, we would likely bring a decision to council, just so there's an acknowledgement that that allocation would be effectively reallocated under council's consent. So there's no capacity within the awa to go and consent another water take. So that's the challenge for Wakate, that we actually sit there and hold that, and that's important that we do that for the future. But one of the benefits to the Podes Road project is that when we do go through a consent process, the question will be asked, why don't you just build the reservoir, and then when you do need the water, come back and let's sort the consent out in the future. But in terms of the risk to council to invest such a large sum of money without certainty of consent, we need to really start with that, securing that water take. So in some ways, us working alongside iwi partners and Wakate to say this is, as a community, how we intend to work with the awa over the next 10 years, and then provide that opportunity for future construction is certainly a benefit to the consenting process as well. Probably talked a wee bit around that.
Sorry, just go back one. That whole security of our future water and the allocation, that perhaps we're not using it all up, and they might want the difference. Given the stats we've just received around a 10.3% increase in population for the census data, that obviously proves our trajectory and strengthens our position on growth. But that whole, they could use the difference in our allocation potentially. The arrangement, though, is that because this is effectively a national road, is that just granted they get it and there's no remuneration to council, or and is it only if there's a case to pay us? Because in this, how I'm reading it is, well, you're not using it anyway. There is some room, and they just get it, or is there some negotiation? Because effectively, we could say, well, then it's going towards this consent process or the future build, should we be granted? Like it's, or no, they just will have superseding rights, I guess. How does this work?
Perhaps that's something we do need to come back to get elected member support, but the general principle that we've applied in some of this discussion, because it is very much principle based early on, is that council don't buy the water from the awa. The cost of the water that we pass on to consumers is through the reticulated network. It's the cost to treat the water. So if Wakatei were turning up at one of our filling stations to take 2,000 cubic metres a day, there'd be an entirely different dynamic.
We've had to apply for the amount of water we've been granted, and that required money to get it. So there is an element of price we pay, not necessarily for every litre we pay X amount, but there was a cost, and there's going to be further costs. So can that be recognised or not?
I think we could open up a conversation around that with Wakatei. Yep, I can take that action. So this slide was really just highlighting a lot of the great work that the league team have delivered since 2017 around our pressure management system in Levin, the planning processes put in place around storage of rainwater on sites, and the obviously commitment of funding in the long-term plan amendment to actually move forward with the consent and development of the water treatment plant. This slide just really highlighting a lot of that technical work to get to us to a point where we're confident we can get through a consent process, and we're happy to share and append those to the final council report. Next couple of slides, really based on the principle of getting the cows out and getting some plants back in to that lower terrace. So that's really referencing an area that drops off down and is very much a slight slope out to the awa. So you've got regular flooding through this area, a really good opportunity to re-establish a habitat right on the edge of the dock reserve, effectively, as you head up into the Tararua Ranges. So yeah, a lot of the conversation with iwi partners is around if we are continuing to take from the awa, how do we actually start to give back? So when we get through a phase of develop design, we will be looking at how we can actually start to implement a process around restoration, and that's been a key part of the iwi feedback to date, is that we need to start focusing back on improvement, and that would be a key part of that consenting process. This next couple of slides, and I'll flick over to you shortly, Alvi, but in summary, when we bring the report on the 26th of June, there'll be a recommendation. At this stage, it's likely the recommendation would be to lodge through a standard consent process. That would take us around about 8 weeks to prepare. And at this point in time, although we have signalled interest in the fast-track legislation, and we're on the list of potential projects, Council, on the other hand, have submitted in opposition to that proposal, and certainly not upholding the rights of our iwi partners. So that process will likely take 6 months to roll out. If we're wanting to actually get on a lodge of consent, it would most likely be a recommendation to lodge under the standard process, or we effectively are a sit and wait to see where the legislation lands. And we're not actually seeing the benefit being any faster to go down the fast track process at this point. You want to add to that one, Olvi? Online, can you hear us?
Not really. I'll just maybe I'll talk. Yeah, the next slide, if you don't mind. Can you hear me?
This showing traditional, is it showing up? RMA traditional process?
Yep. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Good. So as Daniel mentioned, there's two paths that we can take. One is traditional process and one is a fast track process. I think, can we go back to fast track process, or are we talking about RMA one? Yep, that one. So the fast track process, we lodge an application to be referred as a project for fast track. So we've done that in May. So now the next steps you would see bill enacted and minister decision regarding referral. There's a known time frame there, and it might take a while. We understand that potentially the bill will be enacted by end of this calendar year, which is December-ish of this year. And then after that, minister, because there will be there are listed projects that's going to be looked at first, and they are approved for fast track process, but there are projects that has been referred to. So HDC has lodged an application to be referred to this act, So minister needs to make a decision if our project will be approved for referral for fast track process. So there's a question mark there, assuming that we've got that approval from a minister, then we need to make to lodge an application, and you see that's a fourth step in the process. So there are a couple of issues before we lodge application. Bill needs to be enacted, and it might be delayed or not, and the minister needs to decide and make a decision to approve our project to be referred to the fast track. So, and there's no defined timeframes around these two steps. Assuming that it's all good and it's all done, we might get referral approved in February, March if it goes as we assume, and then at that point, HDC will need to make a decision to lodge or not to lodge application on the fast track process. And after that, once it's lodged, it's quite a quick process. Quicker than RMA process, but it's quite intensive and quite expensive at the same time. If we go back to RMA traditional, this one. So you will see the first step, we need to lodge an application. We are ready to lodge application. We're 6 to 8 weeks away from it. If HGC makes a decision to lodge in 6 to 8 weeks, we can lodge it under traditional process. Then there are some steps here I assume you read it, that talks about what's next. But I guess the key point under RMA is that it's the certainty around the time frame about hearing and appeals is not there. It can take some time. It can take months. It can take, in certain cases, years to go through this process. And we are also at risk of appeal to environment court if we can't resolve everything through the hearing process. The traditional process, that's a kind of a weakness of traditional process. But it's a more democratic and more inclusive process to fast track. Fast track, when it comes to appeals, the parties can appeal just on the points of law, where under traditional, the appeal can be done on merit and points of law, which means that the whole context of consent can be challenged through the next stage, which will be environment court. So if we go back to the last slide, there are kind of elements of RMA process and fast track process in this table. I will assume you read it. In my mind, given that HDC has submitted on a fast track process as well, it's kind of not seen as democratic inclusive process. However, it's quick and guarantees the outcome, and it could be that the outcome of that consent could be a decline, and HDC will not be in a position to appeal that, because you can only appeal on points of law. Then you have to go back to square one and start again. So there is that risk there. Our recommendation of a project team to council is that we go with RMA consent. We lodge it in 6 to 8 weeks. Once council approves that we can do that, and then at the same time, in parallel, wait for bill to be enacted and the project post road to be referred to and approval received by the minister. That will take us to February in the 25, and in February 25 to make a final decision if we want to pull the project from traditional RMA process and lodge it under fast track. I guess at that point, under traditional RMA process in February, we will be already in potential hearings if we lodge in 6 to 8 weeks, and we will know how difficult or how risky the journey is, who is our opposition, what are the issues, can they be resolved, can this issues delay this project by 2-3 years, because we are in a position in February, if it gets too hard or too difficult, too costly, pull the project from RMA process and lodge under fast track where the outcome is a bit more guaranteed. Does it make sense? So what we're suggesting is to progress with RMA traditional, and at the same time just wait for the answer from fast track process if minister decides to refer this project to fast track, and when it happens, we assume it's going to happen by February, March, to make a final decision if we want to pull it from RMA traditional and lodge as fast track or continue with traditional process.
Yeah, thank you, Olvi. So part of the attraction with the fast track would be giving time certainty around the opportunity to coincide works with the O2NL project. We're not at a point where we're saying this needs to be built in the very near term, where we are very much planning for the future. The other probably thing to understand is that from a technical perspective, we were ready 12, 18 months ago, but we've intentionally not rushed this process to lodge consent, because we did want to spend that time actively engaging with iwi partners ahead of even a decision to lodge a consent. So in some ways, the recommendation that we do bring, so we're not seeking that direction today, but the recommendation for a standard RMA process is that we have done 3 years of work with our iwi partners. We're not there, there's still work to do, but a lot of that will need to be resolved and conditioned through that consenting process. But there's a reasonable level of comfort that there's a principal level of alignment around the project, and we feel that should enable us to ideally get to an outcome that would enable us to still link up with the opportunities around O2NL. Sort of caveat to that would be that that ultimately a decision on 26th of June would be to lodge RMA or actually just wait, and we'd be waiting another 7 months.
6 months, yes,
7 months.
And the risk of that, Daniel, is that certain things might change in terms of the standards and national policy statements and all of that, and the rework will have to do a bit of a rework to our AAE.
Yeah. So the question for elected members today is really, what level of additional information are you really seeking ahead of receiving a report? Because effectively what you've got on the screen there will be summarised and fleshed out as to form the effectively part of that council report. There's not a lot of new information other than appending a lot of that technical work that you would require. So there's really question to the table today around what you've heard, any outstanding questions or further information, things that you feel you need more information on, or just burning questions loosely related to a reservoir project.
Just on that, I guess for me, it's probably like during that dual process, what's the cost implications with that opposed to seeing what happens with the fast track, given it's obviously had its first reading. So yeah, obviously, doing dual process is not going to, there's obviously going to be dual cost associated with that.
No. You can I respond to that, Daniel?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so there is no cost implication of dual process. We already applied to be referred to the Act, under the Act, right? And that decision will be made after the bill is enacted and Minister makes a call on the list of referred projects. At this point, we will be and that there's no cost for us with this. At this point, we'll be like let's say a few months in with RMA traditional process, that's where the cost will be. And if we decide at that in, let's say, February, March next year, that we want to go with fast track process for whatever risks and reasons, then we can't continue with dual process. The new fast track act requires that if we lodge on the fast track, we have to withdraw under RMA. So there will be no cost duplication at any stage. There's no cost from now to February until Minister decides if Paul's Road is a referred project or not. Makes sense? And if we decide to go fast track, then we have to withdraw from RMA traditional process and lodge on the fast track. And hello? Hello, could you hear me?
Yep, that's great. Thanks, Avi. We've got another
Yep.
question from Councillor Tamihana.
Yep.
Not so much a question, probably just more to reiterate my earlier point about alternate use and alternate solutions to keep the reservoir topped up. I'm serious about what that could look like in terms, even if it's looking at an existing bore that has allocation that potentially is not used, that we should be looking to try and secure for our reservoir. The second one, I just wanted to go to the considerations table. And in the fast track process, I'm quite open-minded about both these processes, if I'm completely honest. I think our community will get the benefit whichever route we go down. But the part that concerns me is in the fast track approval, where it talks about working with relevant iwi authorities. I think for me, we need some assurance from our iwi partners about who that authority might be that is engaged, so there's absolute clarity from for this council who we are talking to in that space, for absolute clarity, to ensure we're not missing any parts of our community or representational members of Hapu and Iwi. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Justin. I've taken note of that.
Daniel, I suppose I'm just worried a little bit about the alignment with O2NL in timing-wise. I mean, if construction's due to start on O2NL the end of next year, and we're not in a position to be able to provide them with any water until this is actually built, or are you expecting the water meter buffer to be that significant enough to be able to cater for that early construction?
Yes, that's correct. We've got existing capacity, not for the full amount that O2NL require, but we are expecting that even if that 10.3% growth over the last 5 years continues, that the gains from that water metering project, the team are really confident that we're going to find and fix those leaks, and that does provide that buffer. Noting Councillor Tukapua comments around, before we do agree to anything, we do need to really reflect on what it has cost us to hold and secure our existing consent.
Dan, just a quick one for me. Acknowledging this is more about consenting than engineering, but I know when this first hit the table quite some time ago, there was a lot of discussion around O2NL, the alignment with O2NL, and the potential for the aggregate that's extracted to build the reservoir, to build the pond. There could be some value in that in terms of eroding. Is that still part of the engineering component of the project?
It's still on the table, but probably the revenue and the quantity of gravel isn't as much as maybe was initially expected. That if we dug a big hole, you'd expect 500,000 cubic meters of gravel comes out of the hole and can be carted off site. But a lot of the gravel that's moved is effectively cut to fill, so it's used to be pushed across the site to actually build the bund on the other side. So we do expect that there'll be efficiencies. The fact that we're going to have stacks of big dumpers and dozers and all manner of things within the region. So there's a benefit in aligning for construction costs, but the residual gravel could provide some benefit, and so we will look to open a conversation up at the appropriate time with Wakatahi. We could look at getting an earthworks consent, which is not a complicated process to dig a hole in a paddock, which is effectively all we'd be doing at the moment. but we would look to align that with some more certainty around that consenting process. Ideally, we would have a consent granted, and it would be quite clear. But a lot of the consent process is tied up with certainty around the way the system functions, the impact on the awa, some of the technical design more so than just simply the earthworks. But we would look to try and align those. Yeah, certainly timely, given the advancements and the speed of pace with O2NL, that we do get moving on this, knowing there's still further work to do.
I wanted all kinds of data. I wanted multiple years of data on river flow and our daily take versus that. What did I write? River flow rates from ECAN, our daily takes. So to be able to work out what days we actually have supplementary allocation, that 10% over the river flow, what days we can't take, so we can figure out what the daily excess is. I assume someone's already done the math on this. But the implications of how much additional buffer we actually have, because based on if we're giving Wakakotahi 2,400 a day, we've got 600 litres of buffer under our current consent, which means it'll take 3.5 years to even fill this reservoir. Plus whatever estimates we've got on data of what the water meter savings are going to be, growth accounting. Mostly to work out. If this is feasible under current consent, do we need to be applying for more? Ideally, I'd like to see this project result in us taking less from the river. I think the ultimate outcome is we have less of an impact, but we have water security. And I wondered if you had any comment on the scaling. Why have we chosen this size? Is this just as big as we can possibly build on this site? I love that. Is 50 days of water how many days of water we want to be storing? Does it actually result in 50 days of water? More on your table of how does this actually work? I'd obviously be supportive of the standard AMA process.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of background. Someone has crunched the numbers, our river hydrologist. The concept isn't that we're growing to our maximum, and then we've got ever decreasing capacity to fill the reservoir. The key concept is that quite regularly on a weekly, monthly basis, we have these big cycles where the river might, so on any given day, could be up around 20 to 30,000 cubic meters flowing through that river, versus when it gets down to low flow, around 1,500 cubic meters a second, and that's when we've actually got to start to implement those water restrictions. So there is quite a lot of capacity when the river, after those big storm events, to actually fill the awa, and that comes down to that management plan around making decisions to say, do we fill it today? Do we draw down? Do we look at the forecast and actually think, we need to start getting this reservoir building up? We're in for a dry summer. All of those types of decisions would be weaved into that operational framework. We, as of today, have enough concept numbers and design that we've pulled in industry specialists, and Olivia, you may want to talk to some of that hydrologist work, but I think if we append some of the work done today, which is concept feasibility tested level to say yes, it's feasible, there's obviously still a lot of work to come, and agree that one of the principles we need to achieve is not just continuing to draw more down water from the reservoir, from the awa.
Yeah, I think, Daniel, you covered it well. Don't want to go too much detail, but we have a good report that kind of frames the whole story about the water and how it's going to be used. I'm happy to share that if required.
Daniel, my last question is, so we've bought water in-house, effectively, and soon we'll have to do water done well and CCO models, and at some point in time we'll be in the middle of this, potentially, and that transition, and how do we ensure that the intent or the way in which we're designing it to operate with all those considerations, how that transfers and is implemented and followed through effectively if it's in some ways handed over and there's different people and things like that. Like, how do we ensure its sustainability in the way in which we want it to give effect?
Yeah, if we look at some of the stats with somewhere in the region of 2,500 new homes or new residents that have moved into our district over the last census period, I think the numbers for Wellington City were negative 48. So we've actually got a very real situation where over that COVID period, there's been a reduction in population within the Wellington City. Horowhenua continuing to grow. The forecast out of the Greater Wellington Framework is we're going to see another 20% growth for the entire Wellington region, situated in the next 30 years within Horowhenua. So a key part of that engagement, whether we're looking north, south, with a large collective or with smaller consortia of council, would be embedding some of the what sits within our current long-term plan into that new entity and framework. So there's, I suppose, the whole concept behind some of that transition is actually to free up capital headroom. There's a considerable need for that to happen in some of the larger metros, regardless. It's not to say we're at that tipping point now where we need it today, but in the future, if we are to continue to plan for this growth, there has to be some funding to come from somewhere. The fact that the project's already, if the project was consented, it's planned, it puts us on a really good path to have a plan for the future to cater for that growth. Because predictions are that it would continue.
I'm not so much concerned. I understand the balance sheet separation and providing, ability to raise the funds to build the thing. But I'm about the principles and the values around how what we're doing and how we're doing it. How does that transfer to a new body who's effectively going to be controlling and managing or doing your job? So what you're saying, I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. But then how do we ensure that as it moves to someone else's hands?
So I think there's a couple of components to that. One is the more work that council can do to set this project up and have the project along the sequencing of events, the better in terms of that control bit. What we don't know yet, although the bill, the second bill is getting introduced to the House today, so we might know a little bit more today, but I've not read it yet. But what we don't have that assurances on yet, and actually a few of us were in a meeting late yesterday with KCDC, was around the how does a new model give power to community voice, give power to community intelligence, and what might be important to Wellington isn't assumed that's what's important to Horowhenua. So I don't have the answer to it other than to say keep asking that question, and we're asking that question. But thirdly, in the work that I have seen to date, and if I look at the water care model that's been announced, which is obviously really different and of a different scale to something we'd have here, what it does is through the creation of the CCO or the COO, is it does reorientate council's ability to have the more traditional statement of intent opportunity, as we see in the current CCO legislation. And yes, the statement of intent arguably is only a piece of paper, but it is the mechanism in which council can control the organisation and give direction. And so I think that when we see the second bill, but also as the conversations over the next few months continue to progress, what we've got to keep asking ourselves is, do we feel like those mechanisms give councils like ours enough opportunities, enough checks and balances to be able to give that community voice, direction and input?
No more questions. We'll close out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Holly.
So, Mayor Bernie, in record, like this doesn't normally happen, but we're way ahead of schedule. We don't have waka kotahi until